Cop gets death penalty. Then his German Shepherd does the unthinkable. When Officer Tom's world is shattered by the death of his loyal K9 partner, Max, he's left with nothing but guilt and grief. But just when he's about to give up, Max's German Shepherd companion, Diesel, steps into his life, offering an unbreakable bond and a second chance at redemption. As Tom navigates the dangers of his dangerous profession, Diesel proves to be more than just a partner. He's a symbol of loyalty, strength, and unwavering courage. Together, they'll face a criminal underworld, testing their bond and forcing Tom to confront the true meaning of loyalty, sacrifice, and justice. Officer Tom Harris had always known the true meaning of loyalty. He had spent years serving his community, the weight of his badge a constant reminder of his duty to protect. But it wasn't the badge that truly mattered to him. It was the companionship that kept him grounded. His German Shepherd, Max. Max was more than just a dog. He was Tom's partner, confidant, and the only family he had left after a painful divorce. The bond between them was unbreakable, formed not just through training, but through shared experiences. Whether it was the long nights on patrol, chasing down suspects, or the quiet evenings at home, Tom and Max had always been inseparable. Max had a keen sense of loyalty, and Tom had come to rely on it in ways that words couldn't describe. The police station was often a place of stress and chaos, but when Tom returned home at the end of each shift, Max was there, waiting by the door with his tail wagging. Tom would crouch down, his fingers ruffling through Max's thick fur, and for a moment, the world outside would disappear. It was just them, a man and his dog, two souls bound by trust. The bond between them went beyond simple companionship. It was a shared understanding. Max knew when Tom was worried or tired, and Tom knew when Max was alert, sensing danger even before he could. Together, they were a team. But it wasn't just about work. Max had been there for Tom during some of the darkest moments in his life. When Tom's marriage fell apart, it was Max who stayed by his side, offering comfort in his own silent way. When his world felt like it was crumbling, Max was his steady presence. Yet, as close as they were, life in law enforcement was unpredictable. Every day brought new challenges, and Tom knew that one wrong decision could change everything. He had always believed that the loyalty he shared with Max could carry them through any challenge. But as Tom stood in front of a courtroom weeks later, he wondered if even that bond could save him now. Max's loyalty had always been unwavering, but it would soon be tested in a way neither of them could ever have imagined. Tom's phone rang in the dead of night. He didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. His partner, Officer Danny Harris, was always the first to call when something urgent came up. "Tom, we've got a situation," Danny's voice crackled through the phone. Tom jumped out of bed, Max immediately sensing the change in energy. The dog stood up, ears alert, his eyes focused on Tom with a knowing gaze. Max had always reacted to Tom's shifts in mood, and tonight was no different. "What's going on?" Tom asked, already slipping into his uniform. Max followed him out of the room, his paws patting softly on the wooden floor. "It's a robbery gone wrong, and the suspect's on the move. We need you and Max here now." Max let out a low growl, as though sensing the danger. Tom couldn't shake the feeling that tonight something wasn't going to go as planned. The streets were eerily silent as Tom and Max arrived at the scene. The flashing lights of the police cars painted the dark streets in red and blue, and the tension in the air was palpable. Max's keen sense of smell and hearing helped Tom navigate through the chaos. They were close. Tom could feel it. "Max, stay alert," he muttered under his breath, his voice steady, yet tight with anticipation. Max's ears pricked up as they moved through the alleyway, their footsteps quick but careful. The dog led the way, his nose to the ground. Without warning, Max bolted forward, a flash of muscle and fur, following a trail that only he could sense. Tom's heart raced. This was it, the moment that separated a regular officer from someone truly dedicated to their job. The chase was on. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out, piercing the night air. Max growled, sprinting faster than Tom could follow. He could hear his dog's powerful bark echoing ahead, then a struggle. "Max!" Tom shouted, sprinting after him. But by the time he reached the alley, everything was already too late. Tom stood in front of the police precinct, his face pale, his hands trembling. The suspect had been taken into custody, but at what cost? Max lay on the ground, his fur matted with blood, his eyes still open, but his body motionless. Tom had arrived just in time to see Max tackle the suspect, but the gunshot had struck deep. The weight of the moment crushed him. Max had saved his life. But at what cost? The loyalty Max had always shown him had never been clearer than in that moment. Tom felt tears well up in his eyes, his vision blurring. "He's going to make it, right?" Tom's voice was barely a whisper, even though he was asking the officer standing next to him. But he could see the answer in the officer's face. Max wasn't going to make it. The thought of losing his loyal companion was unbearable. His heart was breaking, but he knew he had to hold it together. He owed Max that much. Tom's life quickly spiraled out of control after that fateful night. Max was gone, and the guilt gnawed at him every waking moment. Despite all the good he'd done as an officer, despite the lives he'd saved, it felt like the world was closing in. The press had already picked up the story, labeling him a hero, but in Tom's eyes, he had failed. He had failed Max. The days blurred together. Tom found it hard to focus on anything. He couldn't bring himself to work, couldn't bring himself to even leave the house. His world had been built around that dog, and without him, it felt like everything was meaningless. Yet, amid the silence, Tom's thoughts would drift to one thing. The loyalty Max had shown him was unlike anything he had ever known. Max had given his life for him, and Tom couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just a simple act of bravery. A week later, Tom received a letter, an official summons to court. The charge was clear: negligence in duty. The city's response to the incident wasn't just a slap on the wrist. They were ready to make an example of him. He was being blamed for what had happened to Max, and the consequences would be severe. In that moment, Tom realized something. He was going to lose everything: his badge, his career, his life as he knew it. But what Tom didn't know was that something unexpected, something beyond his understanding, was about to unfold. And it would be Max, even in death, who would lead the way. The courtroom was filled with tension. Tom sat on the defendant's bench, his mind racing. His eyes were fixed on the judge as the charges against him were read aloud: negligence and failure to protect his partner. The words stung. Tom had always been a man of integrity, and yet here he was, accused of being the one responsible for Max's death. His lawyer, a man Tom barely knew, tried to make his case, but the weight of public opinion was heavy. News outlets had painted Tom as a tragic figure, but they had also depicted him as an officer who had failed to protect his K9 partner. How could they understand? Max had saved lives, Tom's life, countless times. As the prosecutor spoke, Tom's thoughts wandered. He knew the world didn't see things the way he did. But Max knew. Max had always understood. That's why Tom couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was on the second day of the trial that something strange happened. As Tom sat in the back of the courtroom, a woman walked in, her face determined. She was a private investigator, and her name was Rachel. She approached Tom during a break in the proceedings. "I've been looking into the case," she said quietly, "and I believe there's something you don't know." Tom looked up at her, unsure what she meant. "Max wasn't just trying to save you that night," Rachel continued, her voice steady. "There's more to this. Someone was pulling the strings behind that robbery." Tom felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Was Rachel saying that the night Max died wasn't just an unfortunate event? That someone else had set it all up? She handed him a folder. "You need to read this. It's all here." Tom opened the folder, his heart pounding in his chest. Everything he thought he knew about the night Max died was about to change. As the investigation continued, Tom discovered the unthinkable. His best friend, Officer Danny Harris, was involved in a scheme to sell illegal weapons. Max had been chasing down a suspect who had links to a criminal syndicate that Danny had been secretly working with. It all made sense now. Max had been targeted not because he was a threat, but because he had been a threat to Danny's hidden life. Danny had set up the robbery as a distraction for Max to be taken out. And Tom, unknowingly, had been caught in the middle. Rachel had already gathered the evidence, and now Tom had to make a choice. Should he bring this to light and destroy his friend's life? Or should he take the fall himself, preserving the reputation of the department he'd served for so long? Tom's world felt like it was collapsing. Danny was more than just a fellow officer. He was the closest thing to family Tom had left. But the truth was undeniable. Max had never been a casualty of random violence. He had been a victim of betrayal. Tom walked into the precinct, his mind made up. As he stood face to face with Danny, he could see the guilt in his eyes, but also the desperation. Danny's career was on the line. His freedom was on the line. "Tom," Danny said, voice breaking, "I didn't mean for it to happen this way. It was never supposed to get out of hand. You killed Max." Tom's voice was cold, yet tinged with heartbreak. "And now, you've killed whatever friendship we had." Max had been loyal to Tom, and now Tom would be loyal to the truth. The moment Danny was arrested, everything changed. The courtroom erupted in chaos as the truth was finally revealed. But there was no joy in Tom's heart. Max was gone, and even though justice had been served, the emptiness remained. But the unthinkable didn't end there. The night after Danny's arrest, as Tom walked through the empty streets in a fog of grief and confusion, a shadow moved toward him. He turned to see a familiar figure, Max. Not the Max who had been taken from him, but a spectral image of his dog. The German shepherd stood tall, eyes shining with the same unwavering loyalty Tom had always known. Tom's heart skipped a beat. Was it his grief playing tricks on him? Or was this something more? The ghost of Max didn't speak, but his presence was undeniable. He was there to show Tom something Tom had yet to understand. Tom could no longer ignore the vision of Max. The dog's presence in his life now felt like a guiding force, pulling him towards answers he had yet to find. Max had died trying to protect him, and now he was back in some form, trying to help him find peace amidst the chaos. Tom's initial confusion gave way to a quiet sense of resolve. The ghost of Max showed him the path to redemption, not just for himself, but for the honor of the dog he had loved so dearly. Max wanted him to push forward, to make things right. In the days that followed, Tom found himself retracing his steps, uncovering more about the betrayal that had shattered his world. Every piece of evidence against Danny seemed like a reminder of what Max had given for Tom's sake. Tom reached out to his old colleagues, the ones who hadn't turned their backs on him, determined to expose the full extent of the criminal syndicate Danny had been involved with. But even as the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, Tom's mind kept drifting back to Max, his unwavering loyalty, his final sacrifice. As Tom confronted Danny with the undeniable proof of his crimes, the shock on Danny's face was palpable. But guilt wasn't the only emotion Danny felt. Fear was there too. Fear of what would happen to him now that Tom had discovered the truth. "You have no idea what you're up against, Tom," Danny said, voice trembling. "This isn't over. They'll come for you next." Tom's heart raced, but he knew he had to do what was right. He couldn't let Max's death be in vain. The more Tom uncovered about Danny's connections, the more dangerous the situation became. It wasn't just about justice for Max anymore. Tom had uncovered something larger, something that had tentacles extending deep into the criminal underworld. Someone higher up, someone more powerful than Danny, was pulling the strings. And they didn't intend to let Tom expose their operations. Now that Tom knew he was fighting not only for justice, but for survival, his resolve hardened. Max's spirit seemed to guide him, bolstering his courage in the face of overwhelming odds. Tom went public with the information, implicating Danny and the syndicate. But as expected, things didn't go according to plan. Tom's life was in danger, and now his actions had placed everyone he cared about at risk. Tom was starting to realize the enormity of the conspiracy he had uncovered. The criminal syndicate was not just a group of rogue individuals. It had its claws deeply embedded in the system. The more he dug, the more dangerous things became. The shadowy figure behind the scenes was untouchable, until now. Tom knew this would be his last chance to expose everything. He couldn't back down. His mind raced as he planned his next move, aware that every step he took could put him in even greater peril. Max's spirit seemed to guide him, offering silent reassurance. He wasn't alone in this fight. Rachel's investigation had led to a disturbing discovery. A high-ranking officer was involved with the syndicate. Tom's heart sank when he realized that someone within his own department had been feeding information to the criminals, making their operations nearly unstoppable. Tom struggled to accept the truth. The very system he had sworn to protect was now a part of the corruption he was trying to end. As he confronted Rachel with the news, she confirmed his worst fears. This officer was someone Tom had trusted, someone he had called a friend. The more Tom investigated, the more he felt the weight of Max's absence. The dog had been more than a companion. He had been Tom's silent protector, guiding him through the darkest moments. On the night of a particularly tense stakeout, Tom found himself lost in thought. As if on cue, Max's ghost appeared again, guiding Tom toward a building on the outskirts of the city. The vision was brief, but its message was clear. This was where the final piece of the puzzle lay. Tom and Rachel arrived at the abandoned building Max had led him to, and they made a shocking discovery. Files documenting the full extent of the syndicate's operations, including high-profile politicians and officers. But as they were about to leave, they were ambushed. Tom barely escaped with his life, but the evidence was in their hands. Max's presence had never been clearer. The dog had led them to the truth, and now Tom had to find a way to expose it without endangering everyone around him. The danger escalated. Now that Tom had the evidence, those behind the syndicate would stop at nothing to silence him. He was marked for death. And yet, Max's loyalty still pulsed in his heart, propelling him forward. He couldn't give up now. He owed it to Max. In a quiet moment of reflection, Tom realized the full extent of his journey. This was no longer just about exposing the syndicate. It was about redemption for himself, for his career, and for Max, who had died trying to protect him. Tom knew he couldn't do this alone. He reached out to his former colleagues, those who had distanced themselves after the trial. Some were reluctant to get involved, but Tom's persistence and the gravity of the situation convinced them to join his cause. They prepared for the final showdown, a desperate gamble to take down the entire syndicate. It was a risky move, but Tom had no choice. With Max's memory pushing him forward, he knew he had to do whatever it took. As the day of the operation approached, Tom had one last encounter with Max's spirit. This time, the dog was silent, but his presence was overwhelming. Tom understood. It was as though Max was telling him, "It's time." Max had taught him everything he needed to know: loyalty, honor, and the courage to do what was right, no matter the cost. The final confrontation with the syndicate unfolded like a high-stakes chess game. Tom and his allies infiltrated the heart of the operation, knowing that the criminals were more dangerous than ever. As Tom walked into the lion's den, the memories of Max's loyalty filled him with an overwhelming sense of purpose. The operation was chaotic, full of narrow escapes and tense moments, but Tom managed to corner the syndicate's mastermind, the officer he had once trusted. The betrayal was complete, but Tom couldn't let his anger cloud his judgment. The mastermind tried to flee, but Tom was relentless. They fought, physically and emotionally, as Tom demanded answers. The officer confessed to his involvement, revealing that the syndicate's reach went beyond what anyone had imagined. But just as Tom was about to make the arrest, a gunshot rang out. Max's ghost appeared once more, this time standing between Tom and the gunman. The apparition distracted the assailant long enough for Tom to disarm him. The gunman was arrested, and the syndicate was dismantled. In the aftermath of the operation, Tom stood on the rooftop, watching the sunrise. The city was quiet for the first time in weeks. He had exposed the syndicate, brought justice to those responsible for Max's death, and cleared his name. But the victory felt bittersweet. Max was gone, but his spirit had never left Tom. The dog's loyalty had transcended death itself, guiding Tom through every dark moment. For the first time in a long while, Tom felt at peace. He had redeemed himself. Tom walked into the empty house where Max had once greeted him every day. It felt empty, like a chapter in his life had come to a close. But Tom knew he had to move forward. He couldn't dwell on the past forever. He had to honor Max's memory by living a life that reflected the loyalty and courage the dog had shown him. Tom returned to his work as a cop, but he was forever changed. The trials of the past had shaped him into someone more resolute, more understanding of the true meaning of loyalty. He had faced the darkest parts of himself and come out stronger. Max's spirit was with him, and Tom was ready to honor that memory by continuing to serve with the same sense of honor and dedication that Max had given him. After the fall of the syndicate, life began to slowly return to some semblance of normalcy for Tom. However, he was no longer the man he had been before Max's death. The events of the past months had altered him. The loyalty Max had shown him, even in death, had given Tom a new purpose. Tom found solace in helping others who had been wronged. He became an advocate for K9 officers, using his platform to raise awareness about the bond between police officers and their K9 partners. His work in the department had changed. He was now a symbol of resilience and loyalty, an embodiment of what true devotion meant. As the weeks passed, Tom noticed small things that reminded him of Max. A bark from a distant dog would catch his attention, or he would hear a dog's paws clicking on the pavement. Each time, a brief flash of pain would surge through his heart. But it was no longer a crippling grief. It was a reminder of what Max had been to him. A protector, a partner, a best friend. Tom had taken to volunteering at a local animal shelter, trying to find peace by helping other dogs in need. He couldn't replace Max, but he hoped he could offer some of that same loyalty and companionship to others who needed it. One day, while volunteering at the shelter, Tom met a dog, an abandoned German Shepherd named Diesel. The dog's intense gaze reminded Tom so much of Max that it took him by surprise. Diesel had a strong presence, and despite his troubled past, there was something familiar in the dog's eyes. Tom knew immediately. This was the dog that could help him heal. Diesel had the same unspoken bond Max had shared with him. As Tom took Diesel under his care, he felt a spark of hope. Perhaps this was his chance to experience the loyalty he had lost, but in a new light. Tom continued his work in the department, with Diesel by his side. The bond between them deepened, and for the first time since Max's death, Tom felt like he could be whole again. But the pain of losing Max never completely faded. Every time Diesel looked at him, it felt like Max was watching too, like the spirit of the dog who had been everything to him was still close, still guiding him. It wasn't until one quiet evening, after a particularly rough day, that Tom realized Diesel wasn't just a companion. Diesel had become a part of him, a reminder that no matter how much time passed, loyalty, once given, could never be forgotten. The two of them had forged a new path together. Tom's dedication to his work and to Diesel was tested when a new case emerged that hit too close to home. It was a robbery gone wrong, and the suspect was linked to a new crime syndicate. As Tom and Diesel investigated, they uncovered that this group had connections to the old syndicate that Max had given his life to protect him from. Tom couldn't believe it. What he thought was a finished chapter was now coming back with even more danger. Diesel's protective instincts kicked in, just as Max's had. The bond they shared became their greatest strength as they faced down these new threats, showing that loyalty and courage never fade, even in the face of fear. As Tom navigated through the investigation, he found himself conflicted. His desire to see justice served was tempered by the haunting memories of Max, the one who had paid the ultimate price. Was this new case worth risking Diesel's safety? The emotional weight of what had happened to Max made every decision harder. But Diesel's unwavering loyalty reminded Tom that he could face these challenges, just as Max had pushed him to face the hardest truths. He couldn't let the ghosts of the past prevent him from moving forward. Diesel needed him, and Tom needed to honor the legacy Max had left behind. The new syndicate was cunning. They knew Tom's methods and were aware of Diesel's presence. The closer Tom got to the truth, the more dangerous the situation became. One night, while on a stakeout with Diesel, they were ambushed. It felt like a nightmare, the same feeling Tom had experienced when Max was taken from him. But Diesel proved to be more than just a partner. He was Tom's protector. The dog fought fiercely, keeping Tom safe despite the odds. This was the loyalty Tom had longed for, unwavering and fierce. Even in the heat of danger, Diesel stood by him, just as Max had. After the ambush, Tom and Diesel were more determined than ever to bring the criminals down. The investigation had reached a critical point, and the truth was finally within reach. Tom realized that he had a chance to make things right, not just for himself, but for Max and for Diesel. The final confrontation was a brutal one, but with Diesel by his side, Tom was able to apprehend the syndicate's leaders. The criminals who had plagued their city for so long were now behind bars. The battle was won, and the loyalty Tom had cherished for so long had paid off. But even as Tom stood victorious, there was a bittersweet feeling in his heart. Max's death had been the catalyst for everything, but it was Diesel who had carried him through the darkest times. He wasn't replacing Max, he was honoring him by continuing the fight for justice. With the syndicate dismantled and justice served, Tom stood on the steps of the courthouse, Diesel at his side. It had been a long road, one filled with pain, betrayal, and loss. But it had also been a journey of healing, of finding the strength to move forward. Tom realized that this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where loyalty would always remain at the center of his life. Max's memory would live on in every step he took, every action he made, and in Diesel's eyes, which reflected the same bond of loyalty that had defined his partnership with Max. Tom and Diesel became an inseparable team. The bond they shared was unbreakable, and as they worked together to serve their community, Tom knew that he had finally come full circle. Max's death had been the hardest thing he'd ever faced, but it had led him to this moment, to the dog who had helped him heal. Every day, Tom thought of Max. His loyalty had taught him lessons that would stay with him forever. But Diesel, his new partner, had helped him rediscover the strength to continue fighting for what was right. And together, they would ensure that the legacy of loyalty, honor, and justice would never be forgotten. As Tom and Diesel walked through the quiet streets of their neighborhood, Tom couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. The weight of everything he had endured, the betrayal, the loss, the dangerous path he'd walked, was slowly lifting. Diesel, ever the loyal companion, walked by his side, sensing the shift in his partner's mood. They arrived at a park where Tom had often taken Max. The memories of his late partner surged, but instead of sorrow, there was a deep sense of peace. Max had taught him that life must move forward. It wasn't about forgetting, it was about honoring the past and using it to shape the future. Tom took a deep breath, knowing that he was finally at peace with himself. Diesel was there with him, and they were stronger together than Tom had ever imagined. Tom's bond with Diesel continued to grow. The dog was not only a symbol of his past, but also his future. They were now a force to be reckoned with, working together to ensure justice was served wherever it was needed. Diesel's training, his sharp instincts, and his fierce loyalty made him the perfect partner. One day, while investigating a case involving a missing child, Diesel's keen nose led them straight to the right location. It was a breakthrough that changed the course of the investigation. Once again, Diesel had proven that his loyalty wasn't just emotional, it was practical, life-saving. The case brought Tom closer to his colleagues once more. The distance that had grown between him and others due to the chaos of the past was starting to fade. People saw him differently now, not as a man broken by loss, but as a symbol of strength and resilience. Diesel had become a living testament to what loyalty could accomplish. Just when things seemed to be settling, a shadow from Tom's past reappeared. A former criminal associate from the syndicate who had once eluded justice now sought revenge. This individual was known for playing a long game, and now he was targeting Tom, believing that the cops' investigation had ruined his life. Tom knew that this would be a challenge, but this time he wasn't alone. Diesel's instincts were sharper than ever, and together they prepared for whatever came next. The old wounds of betrayal began to resurface, but Tom's resolve was stronger than ever. He would not let his past define him, not when Diesel was by his side. In the quiet moments before the storm hit, Tom couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for Diesel. He'd never asked for another partner, but Diesel had become more than he could have ever hoped for. Tom knew that whatever was coming, he had the strength to face it, and Diesel would be there to watch his back. The days leading up to the confrontation were filled with tension. Tom could feel the weight of the impending danger. It was a reminder that, no matter how much peace he found, the fight for justice was never truly over. But with Diesel at his side, Tom was ready to face it all. The criminal had taken matters into his own hands. Tom and Diesel found themselves chasing down the man in a high-speed pursuit. It was like nothing Tom had experienced before. The stakes were higher, the stakes personal. This criminal wanted vengeance, and Tom knew the only way to stop him was to outsmart him. The chase led them through the city's back streets, each corner filled with danger. Diesel remained calm, following Tom's lead as they closed in on their target. In the end, it was Diesel's sharp instincts that led to the final takedown. The criminal was apprehended, but Tom's heart pounded with the realization that danger had never been far away. As Tom and Diesel stood together after the dangerous chase, Tom realized something profound. It wasn't the victories that mattered. It was the journey, the lessons learned, the loyalty shared, and the lives touched along the way. Max had given him that lesson, and now Diesel was helping him live it. With the criminal now behind bars, Tom knew that his life would always be shaped by the choices he made. His journey had been one of redemption, and now he was at peace with his past. There would always be danger, but Tom knew he could face it because he wasn't facing it alone. With the criminal element in the city under control, Tom had time to reflect on his past and on the people who had stood by him. It was time to reconnect with old friends and colleagues. There were many who had distanced themselves from him, but now they were ready to rebuild their relationships. Tom met with some of the officers who had once believed in him, sharing stories of his journey. Diesel, ever the silent protector, remained by his side, reminding everyone of the loyalty that had carried Tom through his darkest moments. The bonds Tom had formed through his trials were stronger than ever. He began to see his colleagues not just as co-workers, but as a second family. They had been there for him when he was at his lowest, and now, together, they celebrated the victories they had won. As Tom spent time with them, Diesel became a beloved figure. He had helped bring about change not only in Tom's life, but in the lives of everyone around them. It wasn't just about justice, it was about community, trust, and loyalty. Tom's life was filled with moments of reflection. He had come a long way from the man who had been betrayed and broken. Now, with Diesel, he was a stronger, more purposeful man. Every day, Tom felt Max's presence, guiding him. Max had taught him what it meant to be loyal, to stand by your beliefs, even when the world was against you. Every time Tom looked at Diesel, he saw the echo of that loyalty. Diesel wasn't replacing Max. He was building on the foundation that Max had laid. The bond they shared would always be unique, one that Tom would carry with him until the end of his days. Just when it seemed like Tom had reached a place of peace, a case arose that would test everything he had learned. This new investigation, involving an international crime syndicate, felt like a crossroads. It could either strengthen his resolve or break him. Tom knew the risks, but he couldn't walk away. Not when Diesel was by his side. The case pushed Tom's skills and limits to the edge, but with Diesel's unwavering loyalty, they were able to navigate the most treacherous parts of the investigation. In a final showdown with the international syndicate, Tom and Diesel faced the most dangerous criminals they had ever encountered. It was all or nothing now. But through sheer determination, intelligence, and the bond of loyalty, Tom and Diesel were able to bring down the syndicate once and for all. The victory was hard won, and it left Tom exhausted, but the reward was greater than anything he had hoped for. He had rid the world of another threat, and Diesel had proven that loyalty was the ultimate weapon. As Tom looked out over the city, standing on the same rooftop where he had stood so many times before, he knew that his journey had come to an end. He had found redemption, justice, and peace, not just for himself, but for Max and for Diesel, who had been his true partner through it all. The road ahead was unknown, but Tom had learned that no matter what challenges lay ahead, as long as he had Diesel by his side, he would face them with courage, strength, and the same unshakable loyalty that had defined his journey. Years later, Tom sat in the park, Diesel by his side, watching the next generation of police dogs and their handlers. The legacy of Max and Diesel had lived on in the work that Tom did, in the relationships he forged, and in the lives he touched. Max had given Tom the lessons of loyalty, sacrifice, and honor.